Hello, and welcome to the Psych Leadership Podcast, where we discuss the intersection between leadership, psychology, and what it means to your small business. My name's Luke Upchurch, and today we'll be talking about psychological safety. If you recall, in last week's episode, we got into the fundamentals of effective communication, how you communicate with your team, and how you mold that communication in such a way that they are ready to hear it, that they are ready to receive it. Well, psychological safety builds upon that concept and makes sure that not just are they ready to hear it, but that they're ready to absorb it and then go do something with it. So for that, I'm bringing in special guest Jason Shultz. Jason has been a friend and a colleague of mine for a long time. High level, when I need something done in the leadership space, when I have a question, when I'm hitting a roadblock, his is the first door I come knocking on. So, Jason, why don't you take a minute and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hey, Luke. First off, thanks for having me. Looking really forward to talking about one of my favorite topics. As you mentioned, we've worked together for quite some time now in multiple roles, and I really focus on the behaviors associated with becoming a agile organization. So my background's strong in agile principles and practices, agile coach and scrum master, release train engineer, typical agile coaching type roles. And so now I really always want to focus on behaviors associated with it more so than the practices. So the psychological safety topic is really right up my alley.
Fantastic, fantastic. Yeah, and that's actually one of the ways that that Jason and I met was working through Scaled Agile Framework, and we currently work for a company that has been trying being the key word to implement this for some time, and I don't mean that despairingly. I mean it is not an easy thing to get people's heads wrapped around. It's difficult
Absolutely.
to get a team to pivot, especially when I don't know about you, but one of the problems that I run into a lot is that the executive leaders that have been around for a while, this isn't the school of thought that they were raised with. When they went to business school, when they went to college, these things weren't even out there. In fact, psychological safety, if I think back, and you're probably the same, if I think back to when I first started working, psychological safety was not even a phrase that I ever heard. It was, people should feel good about speaking up. Don't be a bully. Don't be an asshole. But I don't know that I heard psychological safety, right?
Yeah, I mean,
There's a
tr-
distinct difference.
traditional management, right? It really focuses on the hierarchical approach of a lot of things, which really impacts how psychologically safe people can work. It's definitely probably one of the largest impacts. You can make a lot of practical changes from a how you do work and what people you have working. And see some change, but to get real significant change, you've really got to change that overall culture. And psychological safety is just such a strong component. We've really got to figure out how to become more servant leaders versus that traditional management approach.
Absolutely. Well, with that, why don't we go on and dive into a couple questions?
Sure.
So, audience, just for the for transparency, whenever I have an interview on the show, I always send them the questions ahead of time so that they're not completely taken off guard. But I specifically ask that they don't share their answers with me, and so understand that this will be kind of an organic conversation. Jason is a little prepared, but I have no idea what angle he's coming at. So we'll see where this takes us. So Jason, the first question I had for you is and this is specifically when you're joining a new team or when you're entering into a new project. What approach do you take to assessing the baseline? How do you figure out what is the psychological safety on the team, and does it need life support, or is it something you can save?
Yeah. So I've never been into one right away that needs life support, but I can also say on the flip side of that, I've never been into one that was ready to go also. So so it's always hopefully a happy, somewhere happy in the middle of that type of situation. But what I like to do first is I really like to go and just have one-on-one conversations with a large group of folks. And it's not even just a specific role. It doesn't mean that I need to just go and talk to leaders. I want to talk to people that are on the teams. I want to talk to people that support teams. I want to talk to the leadership and just kind of get a grasp of the overall what's kind of bothering them today. And what opportunities would you like to play if you were in charge of everything that was going on? So really just giving that understanding and that one-on-one relationship, kind of taking it as putting on my my own psychologist hat, right? Not to use the term that we're working for. I have couch sessions. That's what I love to call them, where I'm literally just hearing, and we're not even talking sometimes about the actual day to day work that's going on, but really being able to see how the environment that they work in is impacting their overall psyche.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And I love that you term those as, what'd you say, couch talks?
Couch sessions, yeah.
Couch sessions. Yeah, there you go. So something that I've done in the past when I have those, because I've the same best practice. I like to meet with every individual person on the team, like you said, top to bottom, in no particular order. But often when you are in that position, when you are the outside guy and you start meeting with them, everybody gets the vision of, what's that old movie, Office Space, right? Where they're going through, and it's interviewing for your own job kind of perspective,
Yeah.
and so people tend to clench up a little bit. And so something that I have done in the past is, when I start those conversations, as I approach their desk, and this is so much easier when it's in person, but you can do it over Zoom as well. I try and find something about them that I can grasp onto. Some aspect of, whether it's the shirt they've got, or something in the background, something that I can pull in. And now it's not a leader talking to a subordinate, or it's not I'm the outsider and you're the insider. Now it is, we're just two people. We're just chatting. So I'll give you an example. I was checking out a team to see if I might at some point want to be on that team. And one of the first conversations that I had with the senior leader, and he's pretty high up in the ranks. And to be honest, I was a little intimidated, right? This person has more certifications. He's forgotten more about the industry than I care to know. And so I was a little intimidated by the conversation. But to your point, to get that psychological safety, to understand what the baseline was, I needed to at least have that initial conversation. So when he fires up his Zoom, he's talking to me on one monitor, but in his background, I can see another one. And I can see an old mechanical keyboard, or old style, new version, but an old style mechanical
Sure.
keyboard, and a curved monitor. And I see a record player, and I see some cool speakers back there. And these, you don't have to be an audiophile to know the difference between cheap piece of junk speakers and Harman Kardon really nice
Sure.
speakers, right? So immediately it's, hi, how you doing? The normal pleasantries. And then I said, you know what? I've got to ask. That's not a keyboard that you use for work. What games are you into? And it completely threw things, because now we're just people. Now we're just two guys chatting it up. And so he tells me about his games and things like that. But my point is that it broke past that initial barrier to allow for the psychological safety to even come out.
Yeah, and I mentioned, right, like spending time talking about not work related stuff. Even today with teams that I've been with for a long time, I still make that a real big focus. Like I said, it's so much easier to talk to a family member than it is, or a friend, right, than it is to talk to someone you've just met. And the other thing that really helps, Luke, in those conversations, or at least in my experience, that would have really helped, is being able to be vulnerable myself, and kind of
Yes.
actually give my own way of leading the fact that, hey, I've been where you're at. I've gone through that problem. Here's something that's really I've struggled with myself. Have you ever experienced this? And kind of show that vulnerability. It kind of helps put that guard down. I've got a leader here that you and I have both worked with, who literally 2 years ago, she didn't want to meet with me at all. She thought I was coming in here to take her job. And I'm not even going to use a name, because you know who I'm talking about, right? And so what I had to do was really start building that relationship. And now this same person, through our overall conversations, we talk 7 days a week, not even 5 days a week. So that's, it just, we spent a lot of time having that close connection. I mean, her being a leader, a position higher than I am, it was nice to be able to have that person now that can help change the culture, right? Because that's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
One person, myself, it doesn't matter how good or how good I perceive myself to be as an agile coach, I'm not going to change the culture of an organization the size that we work for, or even for the department that I work for, without the help of
Right.
others. So really being able to create that overall culture, built around psychological safety, it takes a village.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's I know I think that's the difficult thing for some folks too, is just being able to be vulnerable yourself. Because you deal with things like imposter syndrome where, you're
Sure.
coming into a position and you're not quite sure that you're even qualified to be there, but somehow you have to make these decisions. And part of that, the pressure as a leader, is that you understand that your decisions affect people's livelihood.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's so
Absolutely.
so there's that added pressure of, not just do I need to do it right for my paycheck, but I'm trying to protect the paycheck and the livelihood of my team. So that's something, leaders, as you think through building psychological safety, I'm going to warn you, it is going to put you closer with your team, which is really good, but it can also be a difficult thing to balance, because sometimes you do have to make those tough decisions. And now they're not just a number. They're not just the person that does this job. They're the person that you've seen pictures of their kid, and you know about their health issues and all those things, right? Because they share things with you. I had yesterday, I was actually teaching a class up at the high school, and we were talking about effective presentations, one of my other episodes, by the way.
Sure.
So I was talking to these kids, and one of the health issues I struggle with is psoriatic arthritis. And between the rain, and I don't know if it was the rain and my stress and the diet or what exactly triggered it, but I had taught 3 classes on Tuesday, and I was feeling pretty good. I come back on Thursday, and my joints are absolutely angry. Like, I've got these orthopedic gloves I have to wear, and I'm walking with a cane and all this stuff. And we're recording this, by the way, on Friday, November the 15th, the day of the Mike Tyson fight. Mike Tyson, Jake Paul.
That's
So
right.
I had that on my mind, and I told these kids as we were, talking about being vulnerable. I said, there's a great quote from Mike Tyson. He says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And I said, I went to bed last night before this presentation, and I had a plan. I knew what I was going to say. I knew the amount of sleep that I needed. I had my computer ready, charged, my clothes laid out. I was ready to go. I had a plan. Well, you know what? Nature punched me in the mouth. And I said, so today I'm probably going to be a little less myself. I'm not going to have the same level of energy. So I'm going to ask you to give me a little bit of grace. These kids had never met me, but just the fact that now I am coming down to a different level. I'm not this teacher that is, in their mind somewhere above them. Now it is, oh, he's just human too. Now we can have a candid conversation.
Yeah, and look, I love that, and I can absolutely vouch for you. That is how you react, even with you and I, right? That's how most of our conversations are. But I'll tell you, for me, I've taken thousands of classes. I don't think that I'm exaggerating. Thousands of classes. I teach classes. I've got more certifications I even like to talk about. I forget most of them. But for me, none of it matters nearly as much as the practicality and the realization when you get to talking real world stuff, right? And so that's really, being able to say that. When I go through and I teach a class, I much rather would hear about the real world experiences that everybody else talks about from what they're playing in. Not what the book says. The book, I've read hundreds of books. I always make your backlog or your background on your, you've got 1,000 books. You probably read every single book that's in the background of your Zoom meeting. It's just really having those real world examples and getting personable, like you just said. That it does more. Yeah, as a leader, sometimes it makes it a little bit harder because you have that vulnerability with them where you're like, man, I know what they've got going on in their home life. But on the flip side of that, I know for a fact that here I am on a Friday in the office because a couple of colleagues said, hey, we really think we should work on this together. Normally, you wouldn't dare catch me in the office on a Friday. But because of the relationship and the
Right.
trust and that culture that I have with these folks that are here, I'm like, yeah, I'll drive in. We need to get there. Well, let's do this.
Absolutely. So then, how do you go about changing the leadership style? Obviously, that can be a challenge.
Sure.
When How do you change that mindset?
So, leaders are obviously hard mind. Like you said, we've talked about the traditional nature of how this is. We've first and foremost, I still have those conversations with those folks, and I've got to learn how to understand and talk their language. And so, what I mean by that, right? They're driven by typically checkbox OKR type items. So,
Hmm.
why not make psychological safety an objective on their overall OKR? Let me speak in their terms so that they understand and really get that benefit and show the evidence through that. Most leaders want to do the right thing. They're not here to not let you be psychologically safe. They just think sometimes it opposes how they've always done it. So I've got to make sure that they understand that it's put it on the scorecard, and show them that that's how it's driven, and show them real world data that's proven this. I'm a guy I talked about, right? That I've read all, I've done all this research and I've done tons of courses, but I always use analogies that a Joe Schmo off the a road would understand, right? Hey, we've all
Mhm.
been to the doctors, so I can talk about doctors. We all probably driven a car or rode in a car. So I try to use those real world examples about analogies to kind of not feel like I'm talking over a leader. Because the last thing that most of these folks have time for is coaching. So you'll hear a lot of us, and as a people leader myself now, I think I still talk as if I'm not. So a lot of times I really look at it in the other angle. But the amount of stuff that are on their plates as a leader and the amount of stuff that's on our plates as leaders becomes hard and overwhelming, that we forget sometimes that we need to develop ourselves. So I really feel like if I give them those real world examples, if I give compelling evidence, right, of how this has worked in the past and other places, and then if I some give them data driven decisions, it really makes a huge difference in support to kind of change their minds. And remember that none of this is not an overnight effort. This is something that's long, ongoing, and you never reach finish line. I always joke with agile. Everybody calls it an agile transformation, and I get the understanding behind it, but it doesn't have an end goal. We're going to keep going. There is no finish line on this. It's a journey with no finish line.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I like the point about putting it on a scorecard, making it something that they can move towards, because it's to your point. We People are incentivized by different things, right? By money, by power, those kind of things. And understanding what motivates a person really helps
Absolutely.
you talked about knowing your audience, right? Some of that is knowing what motivates them so that you can shape that message in a way that's going to speak to them. So it typically at the company we work for, um, bonuses and things like that, they're all based off of OKRs. And a lot of companies have that model, right? So
Absolutely.
even if my boss says psychological safety is important, do these things, dangle this carrot, right? They tell us to do these things. At the end of the day, my bonus is not factored on whether or not people liked me. It is factored on whether or not I got the job done. Now, it's a lot easier to get it done if they liked me.
Absolutely.
However, and I'm sure you've seen this, there's a lot of leaders that somehow continue to move up through the ranks by exhibiting bad behavior. They're bullies. They got done what they needed to get done by stepping on people instead of holding a hand out and care and lifting them up.
Yeah. And
So
that's
it's go
so,
ahead.
yeah, you brought a really good point up. I talked about doing my couch session, and part of my couch sessions, I always like to ask three questions in your very first couch session. Okay. It's, how do you like to be motivated? How do you like to be recognized? And how do you like to learn? You can find out a whole lot about a person by asking those three questions. So I love the talk, that you brought up the motivation. There's an old school, and maybe it's not as old school as I think it is, but it's called Champ Frogs, right? And it talks about the different levels or moving motivators. It's just a great website for folks to go out, and it literally gives you a list of items to say, what are you motivated by? Are you motivated by honor? Are you motivated by money? Are you motivated by growth? There are a lot of things, and based off of those kind of conversations, to understand, I know how to use that data to later on help establish how to motivate that individual, right? And so
Right.
it's really good to understand that I'm motivated by providing for my family. That's my big motivation, right? And so yeah, money absolutely plays a part in that, right? So it's just, what is my overall thing? But that might not be the same answer for you, and it's just, I love getting to know that portion of people, and that really starts to break that wall down. How do you like to be motivated? How do you like to be recognized? And how do you like to learn?
That's fantastic. I'll make sure I put that in the description for our listeners today, because it's a great tool. If you can send me the link to that
Sure.
website that you mentioned, let's
Yeah.
get that in there as well. And it's funny when you talk about like what motivates people. In the classes that I was teaching the other day, one of the classes was resume building, and so these are high school students. They don't have a lot of beef to their resume, and I said, well, we have to expand the term of job. Right. Think about what an employer is looking for, especially entry level. At the fundamental level, I am looking for a person that is teachable, a person that can obtain a goal and can play well with others. Whether or not you have the exact skill, we can fool with that later. Like I work with folks, and I'm sure you do too, that their skill level is up here, but so is their drama. Right. I would rather have somebody that is 70% of the skill level that I need, that brings zero drama to the table. That'll win the day all the time. And so when we talked about beefing out the resume here, I said, and I'm talking to sophomores and juniors. I asked the class, I said, how many of you volunteer? And like 3 kids that raised their hand. And I said, guys, you need to fix that. You work in a place that has volunteer opportunities right here in this school. You have no excuse. I said, when I look at a resume, I said, typically if I'm hiring for a role, if I'm hiring for 10 roles, I'll get 150 resumes. That's after every pre-screening I have between AI and HR and an admin and all these things. By the time you get to me, you've gone through 4 different gates before I
Sure.
even see your resume. If I'm hiring for a role, everybody that has applied for that role that made it that far, they have the same basic experience, right? It's so that stuff, I skim it. I'm looking for, I did a thing in this timeline with this result, with this tangible, measurable result. And that tells me a little something, but your volunteerism tells me what you would do for free. Now, it's important that you have a personality to that volunteerism, right? You can't be interested in everything.
Sure.
But if I see the things, here's where you would devote your time for free. Yeah, people do just about anything for money. That doesn't impress me. What would you do for free? Now that tells me a little bit more about what motivates you. And to your same point, I mean, I know you're a dad. You're just a one-time vet, right? Just
That's
the
right.
one.
Just the
All
one.
right. So
Enough work.
and that's right. One is a lot of work. Well, but for those listeners out there that maybe have 2 or 3 or however many kids, the way I always explain this to folks is that the message that you would give, the way you would explain it to one kid, isn't the way you would explain it to the next. Now they have a lot of different factors in common, right? Maybe they grew up in the same house, maybe the same mom and dad, the same values, those kind of things. But what motivates them, the way that their mind works, is going to be different, unique to that person. And so having those candid conversations and knowing that can definitely help. And then getting back to the changing the leadership style, what I have found helps, especially with leaders that are built on numbers and objectives and key results, is come at them with the data almost before you come at them with a suggestion. It's kind of like the movie Inception, if you've ever seen that. The idea of burying a concept so deep in somebody's mind that they believe it was their own idea. And you don't care whose idea it was, you just want to see it implemented. So, for
Totally.
example, there's a scientific study out there that talks about the idea that if you want to build trust in your team, practice servant leadership. Your team, knowing that you trust them, they will do more, they will achieve more, they will basically earn more trust. So it becomes reciprocal,
Sure.
right? It's a self-feeding machine. You did the right thing first, but then your team now feeds you more to do the right thing again. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
in that situation, you give that leader that data, and then you start just with small incremental changes.
And you
I
celebrate during those changes when they're successful. You have to celebrate along the way. Again, this is a journey, right? So there are going to be ups and downs, roller coaster type rides. You've got to celebrate those along the way because they need to see that the progress is being made.
Yes, yes. And in terms of celebration, making sure that you are capturing those things as not just wins, but as something that you want to replicate. So like,
Absolutely.
one of the things that I've been talking with my leadership about, in part of my day job, we have a lot of new folks on the call, a lot of new folks that have joined the team. And I don't think a lot of them feel comfortable speaking up, especially as you get into very technical roles. It's tough being the new person,
Sure.
and knowing that you are one of many. You're a little fish in a big pond, and you want to make an impact. And so I finally had to talk to my leader and actually some other, the other folks in the organization, and said, listen, there's going to be some meetings that we don't all need to be at. Like, the teams will speak up if you're not there. And then also knowing that because they're new, they need the leadership direction, but because they have the leadership direction, they continue to be new. Right? It's
It's,
a little bit of a paradox.
it is. And I talked to, to you a little bit earlier, like I'm a GPS in the role that I am as a leader. They're still driving the car. They can still ultimately, those teams make the decision to go an opposite way of what I'm doing. So we've got to feel comfortable with them taking the car, right? We're not all the way to 100% self-driven cars to this day. You ask me this interview in another year or two, maybe that's a different answer. But as of right now, right, you can unplug the GPS, and it's okay for them to be driving the car. And that's probably the hardest part on both sides. As a leader, that's really hard for folks to be able to give up that comfort level when they've been used to making all the decisions. But then on the flip side, if you're on the team, you've got to take that power at the same time, right? And say, hey, look, I can
Right.
grab the steering wheel. I'm in charge of this car.
Absolutely. There's if you ever, I'm sure you've read this book. It's practically the Bible of Scaled Agile. Turn the Ship Around. Have you ever
Of
read that?
course, of
Okay.
course.
So there's an anecdote in there that I really like. He talks about, the author talks about, that's Dave Marquette, if memory serves, but he talks about the idea that, the word empowerment implies that power is something that I hold in my hand, and I am allowing you to touch it. I'm allowing you to take just a little bit of this power. I'm giving it to you, bequeathing that to you, right? But he says, that's kind of a misnomer. That implies that one person or one entity, one group holds the power. Really, the power is a separate thing. It is out there in the ether, and you grab a hold of it. So, like, I was talking to some team members earlier today, and I had one of them that said, well, I don't always feel comfortable speaking up. um and part of the conversation was, that they weren't quite performing where I needed them to be. And they said, well, I don't feel comfortable speaking up. And I said, yeah, but because you're not speaking up, because you're not willing to ask the question, you are continuing to wander down a path that isn't the right path. If you would have raised your hand and said, hey, I need help, well, we can course correct, we can steer you.
Sure.
But if you're not willing to ask, nobody's going to be able to read your mind. And to that end, I mean, that's one of the things that we always push, especially in this space of, Zoom meetings being the predominant thing. Like you said, how dare you be in the office on a Friday? um, I always encourage teams to turn on their camera, because in terms of psychological safety, if I can see your face, if I can see the expressions, and because I've had those couch conversations and I know a little bit about what makes you tick, I know if you're not feeling well, right? Like our product manager, earlier in the week, as soon as he turned on his camera, I was like, oh man, look how dark the circles are under his eyes. He either
Sure.
didn't get sleep last night for one reason or another, but he didn't. I assumed he didn't feel well, and sure enough, he was out a good chunk of the week.
Yeah, nonverbal cues play a big part in it, right? So if people think
Right.
about, one of the agile principles is face-to-face interaction. Well, obviously, COVID changed a lot of that for us. This is now part of our face-to-face interaction world, right? And so I'm with you. Having that camera on, that creates a very good environment of safety for a group. I'm a guy that I'm usually in a t-shirt and hat 99% of the time, so I don't have that corporate look. I had to today, I guess, because I came in the office. But most of the time, in that, honestly, just being myself with those folks helps relax the folks that I'm on interact with. They don't feel forced to be a certain way, look a certain way when they're on the call. So there is that safety that we have together.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, that was like when I came in to teach those high school students the other day. If our video, if our quality is good enough for this to be on air, you guys will see I've got full sleeves on both arms. And so these students are definitely not used to their teachers having visible
Sure.
tattoos, let alone full sleeves. And I come in and I've got a black collared shirt buttoned up and all my tattoos showing. And it's a way to be able to just kind of level set to say,
Sure.
you know, we're titles are irrelevant. I put on my pants one leg at a time, just like everybody else.
Absolutely.
Um, like I was telling the students when they go into the effective presentations, I said, you know, when you get up to present an idea, you've worked on that idea, you know that idea more than anybody else. So own that, right? You're the expert.
Yeah, confidence
Um,
goes a long way.
right, right. But in any case, it's yeah, being like you said, being able to kind of tear down those barriers and let folks be who they are is a critical first step.
Absolutely.
So we are almost out of time here. I think I had really just one more question for you.
Sure.
So, as you meet with leaders, and I'm talking specifically new leaders, so the target market for this consulting firm for psych leadership, I'm really looking at folks that are new to leadership, small to medium businesses, even large. But if you're new to being a leader, so if you were speaking to somebody fresh out of college, first leadership role, something like that, what steps would you give a new leader um, to get grounded on psychological safety and setting the precedence from day one?
Educate yourself as much as possible. Be a sponge. Never be ashamed to ask a question anywhere that you're going to go. Okay. And try to enter the room as the person that is probably not the smartest person in the room and be okay with that. So those are definitely some things that I would start out with. Be open, like we've talked about, right? Be personable. I think it just makes such a big deal. Honestly, I forgot that you were even asking me questions. Just felt like you and I were having a regular conversation. So have it that way, and then don't be afraid to fail when you're going into any of these items. You're going to learn a lot from failure and be able to adjust based off of this. I think those are the things that I would really focus on.
That's definitely words of wisdom. Definitely. Yeah, I think the being being okay with not being the smartest person in the room. That's that's something that so many people struggle with. I mean, that's like the team that I work with right now in my day job. I'm confident in telling you that they have forgotten more about the work that they do every day than I will ever know. You know, we're in that scaled agile framework, right? We're looking at features, we're looking at stories, and we were talking the other day. Somebody said, "Well, you know, does this make sense to you?" And I was like, "No, but it's not supposed to." I said, I need the description to be tightened up because I need to be able to speak to that. I said that's what I'm looking at when I look at those items, you know, or that statement of work. I
Sure.
need to be able to at least understand it at a high level, um, but I don't need to know how every widget in the machine works. I just need to know that the machine runs. And putting your faith in your team. I think that's the other thing that I would add to your list, or maybe the extension to not being the smartest person in the room. Putting your faith in your team. Know that you hired them for a reason. If you just wanted a clone of yourself, well, then why did you hire in the first place?
Absolutely.
If you hired them to do a job, let them do a job. I actually gave this tip the other day on it was TikTok. I sound so old. Somebody got me into TikTok the other day, and I'm like, all right, I'll create an account. Let's see where this thing goes. But I gave the tip that I said, you know, the first way to build engagement with your team is to first ask them how you can better support, and then shut up and listen.
Sure.
It's real simple.
It is. And you talked about Dave Marquette. I'd add that. Make sure that that's added to the list because Dave
Yeah,
Marquette was all about his whole entire ship. He only made a couple of decisions. He gave very clear expectations, which is probably something we should add to our list that we talk about for a new leader. Give clear expectations. He kept a couple of decisions that he thought were his level decisions on leading his ship, but the rest of it, he just checked in with the team and said, "Hey, what do you think we should do?" And it's such a great advice.
Absolutely. I'll see if I can't find that. There's a great YouTube video, like a
Yeah, about
marker
10
board
minutes
YouTube
long.
video.
Yeah, absolutely.
Worth a watch. Worth
I
a
watch it
watch
at
for
least
sure.
once a year, at least.
Yes. Yes. So I'll throw that in the link as well. But Jason, man, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today. Let's do this again. All right.
Absolutely. I appreciate it so much, Luke. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We're signing off.